Hey Script Apart listeners, welcome back to another episode of this podcast about the first draft secrets of great movies and TV shows. My name's Al Horner and I hope you're in the mood for a very fun, very insightful conversation about, for my money, one of the best action comedies of the century so far. The very talented Drew Pearce is my guest this week. You might know him as the writer of movies like Iron Man 3, Hobbs and Shaw, and 2018's Hotel Artemis, the Scottish-born storyteller's directorial debut. This week he's back in cinemas with a movie I had an absolute whale of a time with. The Fall Guy is a car-flipping, boat-exploding, bullet-dodging, unicorn-hallucinating love letter to practical filmmaking that's pure adrenaline and charisma in movie form. The David Leitch-directed blockbuster, loosely adapted from a 1980s TV show of the same name, stars Ryan Gosling as Colt Seavers, a Hollywood stuntman whose career isn't the only thing derailed when he suffers a terrible accident on the set of an action movie. His fledgling romance with emerging director Jody Moreno, played by Emily Blunt, also hits the rocks in that accident's aftermath. Skip forward 6 months or so, and the star of Jody's new sci-fi blockbuster, Metalstorm, has gone missing. If Colt can use his stuntman skills to track down the Hollywood A-list actor that he used to double for, he figures Jody might just give him another try. In the spoiler conversation you're about to hear, you'll discover how the film began life as a more straightforward, Mission Impossible-inspired stunt bonanza. You'll also hear how there was a moment when The Fall Guy was going to be a jukebox musical devoted to the band Kiss that just so happened to feature fight scenes in the cockpits of helicopters. We talk about how the film fits into a lineage of films about filmmaking that extends from Singing in the Rain to Babylon, what the movie is designed to express about the replacement of practical filmmaking techniques with VFX tools, and how a terrifying experience years ago, in which Drew literally died for a minute or two, gives him a different appreciation of moments like this one, on the brink of releasing a movie that's about to become one of Summer 24's best-loved films. A massive thank you to Drew for being a fantastic guest, and a big shout out, as ever, to our Patreon community, without whom this show would not be possible. If you like what we do on Script Apart and want to see the show continue to grow, you can join that community today for the price of a single monthly cup of coffee. Head to patreon.com/scriptapart for ad-free episodes, early access to episodes, the chance to ask your questions to upcoming guests, and much, much more. That address one more time in case you'd like to get involved. It's patreon.com/scriptapart. Okay, with that all out the way, grab yourself a spicy margarita, as Jody and Colt would do, and enjoy the great Drew Pearce discussing the first draft secrets of The Fall Guy. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, and produced by Camille Demac. Alright, we are recording. Let me just put myself on airplane mode before we begin.
That is the toughest thing with doing podcasts. Like, I literally have had to go around the room and switch every single thing off, like, manually. I apologize if something still manages to interrupt.
That's very conscientious of you. Like, not every guest, I'm not putting anyone on blast here, but not every guest has that. But then again, you are British, Drew. So,
well, of course, politeness is a huge part of my MO.
You are drinking a coffee right now, and
is that okay?
I will permit it.
Have I broken the rules already?
No, it's actually encouraged, but especially so when I know you've been kind of jet setting around like crazy. We were supposed to do this in London last week, but you were here for all of about 30 hours and we couldn't sync it up. Like, how's the jet lag?
The jet lag was actually okay because I literally never went on to London time. And so, I mean, I was waking up London time, but I was still going to sleep LA time. So I got about like 3 hours of sleep each night for three nights, basically. It was fine. It was fine. Like, it's hardly like Chilean pit mining to get like flown into London, hang out with your friends and have some people watch your movie in an IMAX.
I don't know, man. I'm hearing that and I'm just thinking 3 hours sleep. God, that would really tire me out. And I guess that's the difference between me and people like Colt Seavers in The Fall Guy. Like, He's fine being thrown out of buildings and set on fire. Meanwhile, the mere idea of my REM cycle being thrown off or whatever, I can't handle.
To be fair, actually, almost the first 45 minutes of The Fall Guy is about how not okay with jet lag Colt Seavers is. It's the hunt for a cup of coffee is actually like kind of the principal engine of the script for the first 30 minutes.
That's very true. Okay, yeah. Well, it all ties up. Drew, I had such a blast with this film, man. Huge congrats on it. Um, you've talked in the past about parts of your own life sometimes infiltrating your screenplays in ways that you're not even conscious of when you first sit down to write. So, Hotel Artemis, for example, was, I believe you were 2 drafts into writing that before you realized that, this film that in part dealt with a 65-year-old woman who, was going through a change in her professional life, and that was kind of ripping away her identity. You realized quite belatedly in the writing process on that you were channeling your mum with that, who had just had to retire herself. Have you come to any conclusions yet about what it is from your own life that you were perhaps kind of channeling into this film, this story, these characters?
I mean, it's a really good question. My approach on this one was very like, I would say I came at this one as a classical screenwriter. One of the joys of being a writer, but also a director and a producer, and like kind of wearing different hats project to project, that I've found over the last kind of 5 years, whilst as all of those places have kind of started to settle in and I can cover all those bases, and that's very satisfying. What's come with that is a let's call it relative lack of egotism when it comes to a project like The Fall Guy, where, I was first in the door, last out the door. But when I came to it, I was thinking of kind of what Robert Towne used to do on other people's films, which is come in, listen to the movie, listen to the director, listen to the actor, and like build that film. And so, so definitely my approach on this one was actually to pull as much from Leitch's life as an ex-stuntman, and actually as all of the stuff from his life as an ex-stuntman, his exes, his dogs, all of those kind of things, and then do the same with Ryan, like his worldview. I would say Colt, interestingly enough, is probably the closest to Ryan of anything I've seen on screen of him. So that was the approach, but I think when you're doing it well and when it's the right idea, you lock in and your real life ends up in the film however you're not even intending it to. I think on this one, the real life that is kind of in there is the relationship stuff. It's my favorite part of the movie. All my favorite scenes are really just two-handers between Colt and Jody, Emily and Ryan. And I became a single person for the first time in 15 years during the process of writing this. And so I think definitely the weirdness of kind of like being a grown-up in a new relationship is all the way through the film. And the kind of negotiation of being in a relationship when you're not in your 20s, when you're in your 30s or older, you already have a life, you already have, your tics, your traits, the things you love. All of that, I think, got baked into this one. And that's the places where people I know say they hear my voice the most. I think it also helps that Emily Blunt literally speaks exactly the same way that I do. So that's always like a really useful kind of like, oh, the script really sounds like you. It's like, no, Emily just speaks exactly like me, but okay.
That's a beautiful answer. I would have also accepted, for the record, I, Drew Pearce, have lived in LA for many years, and Americans still tease me for saying things like swimming costume when they, of course, have different words for them.
I mean, that is right there from the jump. And there used to be way more of those jokes. Dressing gown, for example, which is, of course, a robe. My favorite one of the posh British ideas for what are American concepts is So here at Kids Party, it's a bounce house. But whatever the shape of a bounce house in England, we insist that it's a bouncy castle, even if it has no castle shape whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I do think that's a huge part of our heritage right there.
Yeah, not to derail things too much, but I once made the mistake when I was out in LA last time of asking for fizzy water at the restaurant instead of seltzer.
That's
Oh
a
my
good
God.
one.
Yeah, never lived
That
it
is a
down.
good one. That's excellent.
This is a great entry, Drew, in this lineage of Hollywood movies that are about movie making or use that as a jumping off point. And I love this subgenre of film. Singing in the Rain was one of the first films I, kind of was brought up seeing in my family household. And a movie as well, actually, that I was inspired to rewatch because of The Fall Guy, The Stuntman with Peter O'Toole. Was there anything about your experience making films and being on sets for the past, I guess, like the best part of 2 decades now, that made you want to, do what the best of those movies do, which is expose how insanely hard it is to make a movie? Because, the opening act of The Fall Guy really is a celebration of like the collaboration that goes into a film set, the expertise, the passion, the things that audiences don't often think about, because when a film's working well, the audience is so immersed in the dream.
Well, first of all, I'm so glad that you rewatched The Stuntman. It's one of my favorite Hollywood about Hollywood films. One of the things that I don't think people know is that the wanna at the beginning of The Fall Guy is a direct homage to The Stuntman, which
I thought it might be.
starts with that amazing wanna that goes around the Dell, which is a hotel that still exists in San Diego. To the degree that one of my favorite parts of the wanna in The Stuntman is when they get onto the cherry picker, the crane, and the camera still doesn't cut, and they go up and then onto the next level. That is also what I wrote into the script for the Fall Guy one. So I'm glad you love that film. Films about films. Films about films can be dangerous, obviously, because there's nothing less appealing to me than self-aggrandizement, and there are many jobs in the world far more important than me writing a film, right? They just are. That said, I adore both movie making and films about movie making. Some of my favorite films are those. Obvious touchstones being things like The Player, but there's other things like an Homme un Femme is excuse my pronunciation, but like that's a behind the scenes stunt guy like in a movie, in a different narrative. And I do think like there's always something interesting about that. Because I think people love it, and I love tapping into it. And of course, starting with like one simple idea, which is like a stunt guy as your hero. You have a lot of new things to tap into for thriller or action, or action comedy as Fall Guy is. Not least, the team that makes a movie is kind of the same pickup team that you create when you're making an action film, in the script, right? There's the tech expert, there's the explosives expert, there's the brains, there's the brawn. And so that obviously is in there, though in the end, I didn't want to hit that too hard. Like right at the beginning, Kelly, the producer, and David, the director, weren't really sure what direction to take with this, and I actually presented 2 different versions of what we could do with the movie. One was actually a Mission Impossible style, bigger film, a bit more traditionally in the vein of Mission and Fast even, and that would be stunting would be the engine to get us into a bigger, more heightened thing. But there was always something about the TV show that for some reason fused in my mind with the kind of shaggy dog 70s and early 80s LA movies like Altman, like California Split and The Long Goodbye. And for some reason, that stuck with me. And so the second version of the movie I presented was was basically The Long Goodbye with some big stunts. And it was originally set in LA too. And actually, I'm really glad that we moved. You move for practical reasons, tax breaks, etc. But actually, it really heightens the fish out of water aspect of it, which is really important. So yeah, all of which is to say, those were the kind of direct influences. The danger of the kind of inside baseball, as Americans say. We don't say inside cricket, obviously. But the inside baseball of a movie about a movie is that it can feel exclusive, it can feel grandiose. And so the first principle I took when I was approaching this was actually something else about stunt people, which is, I believe very strongly, particularly the bigger the movie, weirdly, the more you have to build the underdog nature of your lead. And by the way, when you've already got Ryan Gosling, that's an even bigger challenge, right? So, and so there was something for me about the idea of, literally the term in movies is below the line, right? Like someone who you don't see, who's literally sounds like they're underwater compared with the people who are above the line, the actors, the producers, me. So there was something about below the line workers that felt very universal to me. The idea of I come from a working class background in Scotland. I feel the world gravitate towards blue collar heroes right now with obvious reasons. To be trite about it, the difference between the ultra rich and everyone else is so pronounced. And I did think in stunt people, there was a way of making a universal story, which is about a person who is, by their very nature, by the definition of their role, unseen, right? But still, with good grace, enjoys what they do. And then in many ways, throughout the story of the movie, first of all, that inability to be seen, the fundamental, inability to be seen, first of all, that's a disadvantage in that is the reason that many of the things that happen in the story happen to our hero, because, as a character says in 6 of the trailers, you're a stuntman, nobody cares, no offense. But then I think that's also part of what becomes the kind of third act advantage of him, is his ability to move through different worlds. And then ultimately it's a story about that blue collar character becoming, in the modern parlance, main charactering themselves into this narrative. And so that felt very universal. And that was, for the first few drafts, that was the stuff that I really focused on more than the Hollywood of things, because that is texture that you can bring, like, that the actors are going to plus it with the whole time. So it was more the universal heart that I was worried about going in.
Yeah. So, well, you mentioned the early drafts there. Let's zoom in on that, I guess. I don't know whether I was projecting this, but that there was a slight touch of Kiss Kiss Bang Bang in tone and in the story's adjacency to Hollywood. You've obviously worked with past Script Park guest Shane Black before on Iron Man 3. He once gave you a piece of advice, Drew, about making massive movies in the Hollywood machine. He told you to go into it with bold strokes, anticipating that the studio is going to try and sand down whatever you write. So yeah, when you think back to those first drafts, what were the bold strokes that you went into the Fall Guy with in that first draft? Which ones got sanded down, and which ones were you surprised made it through?
It's funny you mentioned Shane. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is always an influence and a reference in almost everything. And obviously Ryan did Nice Guys with Shane as well. So it was one of kind of Ryan and I's first bonding things. And honestly, the movie didn't feel quite as Nice Guys until a voiceover, was added to it in the final 3 months. And then it really felt like Nice Guys. Not Nice Guys, but that's when it really felt, more like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang.
Yeah.
But it's a goofy investigation, and Kiss Kiss does that absolutely brilliantly. But it's an interesting reference to bring up, because when I was working with Shane, and I adored Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, I talked to him about Kiss Kiss and how it started. And the interesting thing about that movie is originally Shane wrote it as a pure rom-com. There was no investigation. You maybe know this. There was no investigation. There was no crime element at all. And that was Shane's goal, and he was really excited about that. And he came to the end of the process, and he decided it wasn't good enough as a rom-com. And so the way he was gonna, the sexy bacon that he was gonna put his rom-com inside was a kind of more traditional Shane Black crime thriller. And obviously he ends up with this fantastic balance that's just beautiful. And actually, really, it's a rom-com between Val Kilmer's character and Robert Downey Jr.'s character more than it is about anything else. And then strangely, I think it does the most service to the idea of the rom-com through their relationship. But I think the bold stroke by Shane's rule that I went into The Fall Guy doing is weirdly indebted to that idea, which is, and it's not really bold at all until you actually try and implement it, which is, can I put a small, authentic, modern relationship in the middle of a giant action movie? Can I make it be the engine? And can I do it without cheating? Can I, the cheats are to ramp up the opera of their relationship. And one of the things I'm really proud of is for me personally, feel a very real, transition through the relationship of two people coming back together, that I hope, even amongst all the bombast, even amongst all the bombast, there's something people always talk about. Oh, did we put heart in the movie? It's not really that I wanted heart, because often putting heart in a movie is a cheap word for like put in cheap emotion, right? I wanted the emotion in this to not feel cheap, to not feel easy, but not to feel overblown either. It's the subtleties in their conversations that are the things that get them back together. And so strangely, it was holding on to that and protecting that was the boldest stroke in a movie that otherwise is super bold. So what can we own? What can we protect in this that's most important?
Well, it's interesting you'd say that. There's lots of examples of that kind of like tonal tightrope where, like, the Fall Guy seems to get these things so right, where it would be so easy to get it wrong, or to miscalibrate and it to be like a bit syrupy, or a bit whatever the opposite of earnest is. Like it just the relationship at the heart of the film is so perfectly done. I would say the same thing about the kind of film within the film of this movie. So, The Fall Guy isn't turning its nose up at movies like Metalstorm, which is of course the kind of fake movie within The Fall Guy. There's kind of loving acknowledgement of the silliness of big fun popcorn spectacles like that. But it's done in kind of, an affectionate way. Can you tell me how you arrived at Metalstorm, and how much calibration and recalibration it took to kind of make sure that, we're not punching down at that type of film. In fact, like we're acknowledging its kind of silly excesses, but in an affectionate way.
Well, I think it would be inherently dishonest of myself and David Leitch to punch down at fantastical tentpole movies. I, in particular, have obviously moved through lots of different shapes, but most of the stuff that we've worked on together absolutely fits that description. I also think creating Metalstorm and what Metalstorm was actually like, again, with this film, it seems like it should be easy, but there are lots of like subtler challenges in it. So first of all, you want something that contrasts with the reality of your movie, right? So, and our movie is shot beautifully, and kind of in the style of maybe like prime era Tony Scott. So it's filmic, but there's also a little bit of long lens stuff, but still, it still looks like a movie. So the thing you need, if you were making a Sundance film, your reality would be handheld and small and intimate, and it would be easier to create the contrast with the full screen movie when you cut to it. We didn't have that because we need our movie to feel like a big movie as well. So it was always going to be something. Metalstorm was always going to be, or whatever it would have been called, was always going to be genre. It was always going to be sci-fi. There was a kind of period where we thought about it being more Lord of the Rings-esque, more, you know, we look. One of the things Ryan loves is costumes, so we were looking at a lot of genres that had more costumes in them. But there's also one other thing we have to do, which is Jody is the director of this movie, and finishing this movie is really important to Colt. And also, her vision for the film is actually part of what brings Colt and Jody together. And I love that because honestly, most of my relationships have been with people that I've either met at work or I share so much with that is part of our, for want of a better word, love language, right? So if Jodie's movie was shit, there's something that you're doing a massive disservice to their romance, but also, let's face it, a 38-year-old female director being given her first shot at a giant blockbuster. So you need to find this balance between the ludicrousness of a big movie, but a sense of vision and style and aesthetic, even if it isn't your own, that you can see why Jody is being given this opportunity. And obviously, the villain of the movie ultimately will say that part of why she got that opportunity is because she was malleable. But we know that to be a lie by that point in the film because Jody has proven to be everything but malleable. So that's why Metalstorm was such a tricky little thing to kind of create. One thing that I don't know if anyone's picked up on is that the title Metalstorm actually comes from an old Universal film, which was a kind of like not particularly beloved B movie in the Universal back catalogue. And I thought it would be fun in the same way that we are, to be fair, the Fall Guy TV show is beloved, but the way we're taking like an older property and just using like a couple of elements from it to tell our own story. I love the idea that that's the process by which Jody ended up with Metalstorm. I think we've done our job too well in that the original Metalstorm is so obscure that like that doesn't even, and it's not like something you're going to mention in the movie because it's just shoe leather. I don't care, you know. But it's a nice little inside texture that Jody is doing the same thing with Metalstorm that we were doing with the Fall Guy, and she's literally doing the same thing, right? She is working through her relationship on screen in a giant blockbuster where the expectation is you're just there to sell big gulps with the logo on it. And actually, you're still, on as many levels as possible, using it as a piece of art to work through your own emotional connection to the world.
You mentioned the villain there. It feels quite pointed, given the way that this film is a celebration of practical filmmaking, and it's a celebration of the people who put their bodies on the line to deliver that practical filmmaking. It feels significant that the villain or villains of The Fall Guy are people who utilize deep fake technology to kind of, achieve these nefarious things. Like they want to map Colt's face onto Tom Ryder's in this incriminating footage. I'm guessing that wasn't accidental. Can you talk me through what's happening there, and also like what it is that you wanted to add to the script as well to make sure that The Fall Guy is not a movie that's saying CGI is bad. Like there's a VFX whiz in this film called Venti, for example, who seems like a pretty good person who cares about making the movie.
Venti was the name of my VFX soup on Hotel Artemis, which is why.
Ah, no way. That's a nice touch. But yeah, it does feel like you're treading carefully there to sort of like, say something, leverage something about like VFX and the way it's encroaching upon practical filmmaking, but you're not saying anything in a blanket way. There's steps being taken in the screenwriting to make sure that this is not a film that's making a blanket statement about CGI being a terrible thing.
No, I mean, there's a plot point in our movie which is based on the fact that when Colt turns up to set, he gets scanned like all stunt people do, in order to be able to do facial replacement with him. That's actually just a practical thing that does always happen, and that's been in the script for about 2.5 years at this point. So none of that as a point of contention in the writers' strike or the SAG strike was even on the radar, to the degree that I do remember there being a couple of notes of like, will people understand this? Like, do we have to explain it, and hence should we actually lose it? And obviously I'm very glad that we didn't. And again, by the way, an interesting veracity moment is when you see how it's been used with Colt's face in the third act. How good or bad do you make the facial replacement inside our movie look?
Yeah.
And ultimately you have to make it look as good as possible, because they are, it's part of a plan to frame our hero. But it was an interesting thing because in a strange way, it's also a showcase for how good facial replacement is. But I mean, look, I loved it as a noirish, plot point. It felt like it was there for the taking. It also speaks to the practicality of stunt work in the movie, which obviously everyone has talked around about this film, and is a very important thing to celebrate. But I do think the movie is careful not to throw shade at any department in movie making, not least because every single stuntman and stunt designer I know absolutely adores the ability to digitally remove wires or on occasion, in a certain shot, do facial replacement. I think what is important is the realization, and by the way, there's a ton of CG in the Fall Guy itself. Like, there are drops that if Ryan is doing a big jump, there's no way he's not going to be wearing a harness. Now, character doesn't have a harness in the scene. We digitally removed the harness. Sorry, but that is absolutely going to happen with our leading man. And often with stunties as well. I hate when people say stunties. And often with stunt people as well. So all that said, I think it is a movie about, when it comes to the film itself, is about people working in concert with each other. And so absolutely to demonize CG generally in that would have been facetious, honestly, because we utilize a ton of it in our film as part of our storytelling.
I think like the moment in the film, Drew, that I realized I was going to be returning to this movie again and again for years to come was the split screen sequence. Can you tell me about how that came together?
The conversation that they're having about split screen sequences is literally the conversation we were constantly having about whether we do a split screen sequence. I love the kind of old school film theory of split screens, and which we put into the film, which is they are literally two characters talking on screen, and there is a barrier between them, film theory wise, right? Like, in the same way, Douglas Sirk will always put two people who are talking like either side of a bookcase, to kind of create that physical separation as your eye sees it. That's what's so brilliant about split screen. It's basically very intimate whilst also saying these two people have a literal barrier between the two of them. So for that point in the movie, it's perfect. There are tons of reasons not that people are afraid of split screen. One of them is you need two really brilliant actors to be able to pull it off. Otherwise, you could be shooting that split screen for 3 months because you need the timings to work so perfectly. And it's not like the split screen is a one-er, but it is very, very constructed. And that's what's so lovely about them. So we have Emily and Ryan. Honestly, they're both machines. They are just absolutely the top of their game, and that's what allowed us to do it. But I do think, actually, if I recall, we shot those frames safely enough that we could just intercut if we wanted to and lose the part of the conversation that's about split screen, or do that part of the conversation like very quickly and then go back to cuts, because we really weren't sure how a modern audience would take to such a traditional movie making construct. And actually now it makes me want to, put split screen in everything, because it's really satisfying. If you do it with taste, I think it's a really, really satisfying it's a really satisfying kind of ballet on screen. It's great because it's a showy piece of filmmaking, but that still has so much humanity inside it that hopefully, instead of just going like, oh, it's an unbroken one, or that like could have easily just been coverage and then it could have had half a scene that would have moved better. This one I think is actually kind of, it's talking to their emotional relationship, and that fundamentally has to be the reason that you use a technique like that.
Yeah. Well, that scene is just one example, Drew, of the way that The Fall Guy does have this kind of formal playfulness. Like, there it's employing split screen as characters discuss the merits of split screen. One of the other kind of slightly fourth wall breaking things that the film does is it's constantly questioning how the story in Metalstorm is going to end. That's really interesting. It kind of mirrors and anticipates the pros and cons of how the film we're watching as the audience is going to end through a conversation about how to end a fictional movie. And yeah, I'm fascinated by that. Like, the questions that Jody is asking herself out loud in The Fall Guy about how to end a movie, were you asking those same questions as you wrote The Fall Guy, or did you know what your ending was all along with all the meta stuff about how to write an ending, kind of a misdirect? Like, what was going on there?
Well, spoiler alert, I always knew, and it was always there, that Jody and Colt would end up, pulling donuts in the Jeep on a beach, having gotten back together. That said, there were tons of iterations of the entire script, but specifically the third act was shot in sequence, and so we were able to be rewriting the third act all the way along. What tends to happen in those cases is you've gone all the way around the houses and you come back to a third act that's actually a pretty similar shape to the green light script, for example. And that is actually what happened in this one. Certainly formally it is the same shape. Some of the content is different. Some of the characters had kind of changed in the process of filmmaking. Again, it's one of the reasons that on certain films I don't think you can be precious about this as a screenwriter. In fact, your actual job, just as it is for a director, is to listen to the movie that you're making and make sure you're being honest to that, rather than some preconceived idea of what the film would be. There's weirdly, I never quote my own lines because I have the worst memory in the world. But there is a line in Hotel Artemis that I always think of with this, which is they're talking about a bank robbery, and Sterling K. Brown's character says, the rule is work with what you've got, not what you hoped for. And I do really think that's about filmmaking, in that you turn up, you're in a different geography to maybe what you pictured. Your actors are bringing their A game, but if you're doing that properly, they're bringing so much of themselves that they are creating the characters from what you've given them. And in order to do your job properly, I think as a screenwriter, you need to be you need to see every frame that is being shot, whether on location or whether, nightly on dailies. And when I wasn't there, I was literally 2 a.m. watching the previous day's rushes. And then you have a sense of what you've got, and then you should be rewriting the whole way through, because I think you should be finding out who the characters really are and leaning into all of that. And also the tone of the film. And that's the trickier part, because often tone is one thing on set, but a different thing in the edit. And that is why on a movie where you have the ability to do it like this, you are shooting alts as well. You are, getting a breadth of tone in a certain character in order to see what you need in the film.
Music is so key to the tone in the film, Drew, and I know music's important to you. Shout out to your old band Woodchuck. Um, can you tell me, like, there are loads of examples of it, like sort of flitting into the movie. There's Ryan crying to Taylor Swift in the first act, and I think one of my favorite action scenes of the film is the one involving, I think it's around the midpoint, and it involves, well, a dog who's fluent in French, a high-speed chase, a punch-up in some sort of spinning skip, I think it is, and
it's in a bin. It's in a bin, yeah.
Punch up in a bin. That sounds like a Radiohead title. It of course also features a Phil Collins song. So can you tell me, when we talk about tone, and when we talk about perhaps how music is crucial to the tone in a film like this, are you writing that into the script, or are you not letting yourself get too far ahead with that stuff because licensing is going to be a nightmare? How do you approach it on the page?
You approach music on the page in every single possible way. I'm lucky because, like, I was working very much with Dave, the director, on this, and so we were folding ideas in, but they would drop out for either practical reasons or they would change. One of Dave's things is, I think he met his wife like through going to a rock show, as they say in America. Again, they would tease us for calling it a concert. But so in one of the drafts, Colt and Jody had Kiss as part of their love language, the band, and actually every song that was built into the script was like a Kiss jukebox musical. And it worked. It was great, but I like where we ended up at better. And then, for example, there's a karaoke scene. There were suggested songs in there, but you are obviously going to talk to your actors about, from that list, what do they feel most connected to, particularly if they're not like a pro singer. You want something that's going to work for both their character and for the actor's voice, frankly. So that is, all of that stuff is there. On a macro level, music's really important to my process, in that I always build a playlist for every project that I work on. And it gets tricky because the rule of the playlist is that you can't have a track that you've had on one of your other projects' playlists, because they're basically like sense memory triggers, for want of a better word. And then that is the playlist that I write every word of a script to. And there are songs on there, there's lots of score on there, and that is how I approach both the singular film and the fact that some days I have to be shooting something else or writing something else, and I need to be able to switch neural pathways back into another project. And so that musical part is somewhat why I'm so pleased that Phil Collins made it in, because there was lots of score in the Fall Guy playlist, but I always had that sense of the movie itself being a kind of power ballad. I remember saying to Dave right at the beginning, let's not mess around, let's play the hits. And that was reflected in the playlist. And so because of that, Phil Collins, of course, the master, is on the playlist. But right down to the fact that no one was ever going to let me do this. But obviously, there's a theme tune to the original show that was actually sung by the star, Lee Majors, and it's actually it's a good song objectively. Like, it's lyrically really interesting, and it's very catchy. It's called The Unknown Stuntman. And in the end, there is, of course, a cover version of it in our film, and it's done by Blake Shelton. And obviously, I would rather he is great and he is huge and he's part of the Universal family, and I think that's how it happened. But in a kind of nod to Phil Collins' huge part in the vibe of the movie, I really wanted our final cover to be, I don't know if you've ever heard that Cigarettes After Sex cover of Keep On Loving You,
Yeah,
which is so good and
Yeah.
such a vibe. Well, my kind of connective tissue was I really wanted McGee, can never say his name right, who I think of as the modern master and Phil Collins. I really wanted him to cover the theme tune because I felt like that would be the modern answer to Phil being in the middle of the movie. Obviously, everyone was like, no, don't be ridiculous. So, but that's what I wanted. And one day maybe I'll hear
it. Yeah. Also, release the kiss cut to this film, I think.
it.
That the movement starts here.
The director cut with just kiss throughout would be amazing.
Yeah. Gene Simmons is listening to this and he's calling his agent right now. We're going to make it happen. Drew, like, I hope this isn't like too personal or too heavy a question to ask, but about 15 years ago, you died momentarily on the floor of Amoeba Records in LA, and you suffered a seizure as a result of stress and as a result of a lack of sleep. And it culminated in what must have been like a really terrifying episode, but potentially like this life-affirming experience. And, I can't help but wonder, like, on a day like today, when we're like 3 days out from the release of this film, like the reviews have been amazing. It's going to be one of the films of the summer, or at the very least it should be. When you like think back on that experience, like, do you think it changed at all your appreciation for a moment like this? Like, talk me through it.
Well, so it was a thing that for a long time I didn't talk about. And now I feel very comfortable doing so. Basically, it was when I was first coming backwards and forwards to Los Angeles. I absolutely had no career to speak of. I had just, my TV show that I'd made in England, No Heroics, had come out and it had done okay. And so obviously America tried to remake it as a pilot, and it was a disaster, but in an entertaining way, because I always knew it was going to be a disaster. But that was it. There was no second season of No Heroics because there was a recession. I was trying to get a foot in the door in movies in America, because in England, the movie industry was so posh and they just were literally like, you're not in the club. So that was the kind of situation I found myself in. And and like I was stressed, I was sleeping on sofas, I was backwards and forwards. And yeah, one night with my friend, I was at the big old version of Amoeba Records, which is a huge kind of warehouse of secondhand records on Sunset Strip. And I remember just very distinctly coming down some stairs, being really aware of the flickering strobish neon, which of course in reality wasn't strobing, but to my vision it was. And actually, weirdly, the last thing I remember is I looked down at the record aisles, and the actor that played Dr. Spaceman in 30 Rock, who is famously the worst doctor in the world, Chris Parnell, was literally there and looking back up at me in a moment that, honestly, if you put it in a film, you would be kicked out of the Writers Union. And then the next thing I know, I was coming around and apologizing to everyone. And I'd had a moment like this before, a non-epileptic seizure, like 15 years previously. So weirdly, I knew what was happening. And so I kind of like did a mental body scan, and I was okay. I hadn't done some of the things that happen to people when they have epileptic seizures, like they bite their tongue or whatever. And I was surrounded by this group of Americans, and I was like, I'm so sorry. I've had an epileptic seizure. Just so you know, for the next hour, I'm not going to know my name, and I won't have any other pieces of information. So, and because basically when you have a grand mal seizure, it's basically like the operating system rebooting, if you're lucky. And so, so for example, I really didn't remember my name. They ask you what year it is. And in a very calm way, I was like, no idea. They were like, who's the president? I was like, never going to give you that one. And the ambulance picked me up, and, your brain is in such a strange place that I said to them, like, because it's the American healthcare system, you have to pay for an ambulance. I didn't have health insurance. So I had to give them my credit card, and they swipe it before they'll actually take you to a hospital. I had to sign for my credit card. and I didn't even remember what my signature was. I remember it's a dark moment, but I remember one of the guys just going, yeah, it happens all the time, just do an X. And so that happened, and it was scary, and I did millions of tests afterwards, and it turns out it was like a frontal lobe blip. But it was brought on by lots of different things, and started taking a low-grade medicine that would guarantee that it never happened again. But it was a terrifying period of time. And the following few days were the worst. And this is where I did possibly the most, as someone else described it, the most Drewish thing I could have done, which is I was kind of fascinated to see what happened. So I went back to Amoeba Records 2 days later. I was terrified walking in that door. Absolutely terrified. It was horrible.
For the CCTV footage?
Yeah. But this is where I went, and so I found the head of security and, offered to bribe him. And he said, no, I'm not going to take a bribe. I said, could I please see the CCTV footage if you still have it of like 2 days ago? And yeah, so I watched myself have a grand mal seizure, and I was out for like 55 seconds. And that is technically brain death for 55 seconds. So that was a macabre thing to do, but it really helped me. And yeah, I think I've been through a few things in my life where it's a push to say I'm thankful and I wouldn't change them happening, but where they have given me a sense of, and this is where you can tell I've lived in LA for 12 years, a sense of genuine gratitude to the universe for what I have got rather than what I haven't got. I will say the most macabre part of having had a grand mal seizure and dying for like a minute and then coming back around, which does speak to the kind of sci-fi part of my brain, is that sometimes, just sometimes, when things are going well, I wonder, and that's not all the time, by the way, but like on certain occasions where things in my life are coming together or feeling good, that's when I wonder if I did die that day 15 years ago. And this is all a simulation in my dead brain of a life that goes through. And I wish I could tell you that that's like a bit, but it's honestly a sincere sensation that I get just on occasion. It's a very Scottish reaction to things going well, I would say, which is like, oh, well, you must be dead.
Well, thanks, because now at 3 a.m. tonight, I'm going to be awake thinking, am I real or am I just a figment of Drew's crazy parallel universe imagination?
I love that. The more people I can draw into my simulacrum mind, the better. Obviously, because also that means like, I mean, if I did walk around the world thinking every single person is an act of my creation, I would think that would be the most egotistical thing that a human being could do. Also, far too rightly as well, to be like, they all came from my mind.
Oh, well, Drew, I can't say how much fun this conversation has been. Huge congratulations on the Fall Guy. We'll do this again sometime. We'll do it over spicy margaritas in true Fall Guy fashion.
Will we be in swimming costumes?
We'll be in dressing gowns. And
perfect.
Yeah. You can have, by the way, to go back to what you were saying, you can have gratitude. That's fine. That's not too LA. But the moment you do start calling it anything but a dressing gown or fizzy water.
Oh, I never will. I never will. You have my word on it. I'm dressing gown for life.
I appreciate it, Drew. This has been so much fun.
Thank you so much, Al.
You've been listening to Script Apart. Thank you so much for tuning in. A reminder that if you want to help the show continue to grow, you can join us on Patreon by visiting patreon.com/scriptapart or clicking the link in today's show notes. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.